They say water washes away sins. That if you want to hide something dirty, you throw it in the river and let the current carry it away. But water, it doesn't forget. And in the summer of 2016, when the small Mississippi town of Pine Hill found itself staring at the body of a black man pulled from a lake, the water spoke louder than the lies being told on land. The man's name was Malcolm Rivers. He was 38 years old, a hard-working mechanic, a father of two, and one of those people everybody in the community knew. You needed a tire fix on credit? Malcolm had you. You needed a jump start at 2 in the morning? Malcolm would come, no questions asked. He wasn't perfect. Nobody is. But he had a way of giving more than he got. And yet on July 14th, his life ended in silence beneath the surface of Lake Pine Hill. His wife, Vanessa, stood on the shore that day, tears streaming down her face, telling police through sobs. He drowned. He just slipped and drowned. I couldn't do nothing. It sounded tragic. It sounded believable. A black man's death, dismissed as just another accident in the South. The sheriff, a white man who'd been in office for 22 years, wrote it down in his little notepad and nodded. The whispers started moving through the town like wildfire. Poor Malcolm. He drank too much. He was tired. He slipped. Case closed. But here's where the story should have ended and didn't. Because water might cover a crime for a little while. But when the body speaks, the truth rises up like air bubbles from the deep. Enter Detective Lila Johnson. Now, in Pine Hill, a black woman detective wasn't just rare. It was almost unthinkable. Lila was smart, steady, and sharp as a blade, but she was constantly underestimated by the sheriff and his boys. They saw her as a diversity hire, someone to check a box, not someone who could crack a case. She'd been pushed to the sidelines on nearly every big investigation. Whenever she spoke up in meetings, the sheriff cut her off, or the deputies smirked like she was wasting everybody's time. But here's the thing about being underestimated. It makes you dangerous. Because while they're laughing at you, they don't see you watching, listening, piecing things together. And Lila, she noticed things other people didn't. When she first heard Vanessa's version of what happened at the lake, something didn't sit right. According to Vanessa, they'd gone out for a late afternoon picnic. Something spontaneous. Malcolm had walked toward the water, stumbled on some rocks, and before she could reach him, he slipped under. But when Lila looked at Vanessa's clothes, they were bone dry, not even damp from trying to save her husband. And when she asked why Vanessa hadn't gone in after him, the woman stammered, saying she was in shock that she froze. It wasn't impossible, but it was suspicious. Still, when Lila mentioned it to the sheriff, he waved her off. Not everything's a conspiracy, Johnson. Man had a little liquor, went swimming, didn't make it out. Happens all the time. Write it down as accidental drowning. But Lila's gut wouldn't let it go. Something was off. 2 days later, the county coroner, a weary old man who'd seen just about everything, called Lila directly. You might want to see this, he said. Malcolm's lungs told one story, but his body told another. There was water inside him, yes, but not nearly enough for a typical drowning. More telling were the bruises around his neck. Faint but clear if you knew what to look for. Circular, almost like fingerprints. Malcolm hadn't drowned by accident. He'd been held under. The autopsy report was damning. And suddenly, Vanessa's tearful story didn't look like grief. It looked like a cover-up. But here was the problem. The sheriff didn't want to hear it. He told Lila flat out that domestic drama wasn't worth reopening a case, that the town didn't need another circus. Translation, he didn't care. Malcolm was just another black man, and his death wasn't going to shake the system. And right there, the battle lines were drawn. Vanessa and the sheriff on one side, with their power, their lies, and their dismissal. And on the other side, just Lila, standing alone, armed only with the truth she refused to bury. Now, I want you to feel the weight of this moment, because this is where the story becomes more than a case file. This is about an underdog, a black woman in a department that didn't respect her, taking on both a corrupt system and a cold-blooded killer. She had the evidence. She had the instincts. But what she didn't have was support. And when a powerful figure wants a story buried, going against them isn't just risky. It can be dangerous. But Lila knew one thing. Malcolm deserved better. And if the sheriff wouldn't fight for him, she would. Even if it meant going to war alone. The day after Malcolm's funeral, Pine Hill was quiet. Too quiet. Folks whispered condolences at the corner store, shook their heads about how tragic it was. But by the time they got back to their cars, they were talking about something else. That's the thing about small towns. Death is big news for a day, and then it fades into background noise, unless someone keeps it alive. And that someone was Detective Lila Johnson. When Lila came into the office with the autopsy report in her hand, the sheriff barely looked up from his coffee. "Johnson," he said, "I told you, we're not turning this into a sideshow." "With respect, sir," Lila pressed, sliding the report onto his desk. "Malcolm didn't drown on his own. He was held under. That's homicide." The sheriff glanced at the paper, sighed, and pushed it back toward her. "You think I don't know what happens in this county? You want me to make headlines saying a wife killed her husband when half this town grew up with her family? Her daddy's a deacon, for God's sake. There's no case here, and you'd be wise to drop it. Translation: protect the family name, keep the peace, and sweep Malcolm under the rug." But Lila felt the fire rise in her chest. How many times had she heard the same excuse? How many black lives had been dismissed as accidents just because the truth was inconvenient? This time, she refused to let it go. If she couldn't get the sheriff's support, she'd do it on her own. Lila started by retracing Malcolm's last days. She talked to his coworkers at the garage. One of them, a skinny kid named Jamal, told her, "Miss Johnson, Mr. Malcolm said something weird last week. He said Vanessa been acting cold, like she didn't even want to be around him. He said he was worried she had somebody else." The seed of suspicion grew. Then came another detail. Malcolm had been saving money, almost $8,000 in cash, stashed in a coffee tin in the garage. But when Lila asked about it, Jamal said he'd overheard Malcolm mention the money was missing just 2 days before he died. Money, motive, a crack in Vanessa's perfect widow act. But the deeper Lila dug, the colder the town grew toward her. At the diner, where she usually got smiles and free coffee, folks suddenly stopped talking when she walked in. At church that Sunday, whispers followed her down the aisle. Why is she stirring trouble? Malcolm drank too much. She needs to let it be. She's just trying to make a name for herself. It wasn't just about Vanessa anymore. It was about power. This was a town where appearances mattered more than truth, where family names carried more weight than justice. And Lila, a young black woman detective, was daring to challenge a narrative everyone wanted to believe. But she didn't back down, because every whisper, every turn back, only reminded her why Malcolm's story needed to be told. 2 weeks after the drowning, Lila returned to Lake Pine Hill. It was dusk, the air heavy with the smell of mud and cattails. She stood at the shoreline, staring at the spot where Vanessa claimed Malcolm had slipped. Something about the story still nagged at her. If Malcolm had stumbled, there should have been signs, disturbed dirt, a broken reed, something. But when she crouched low with her flashlight, she found something else, a faint impression in the damp earth. A shoe print. It wasn't Malcolm's. She knew the man wore steel-toe work boots almost everywhere. This print was smaller, slimmer, likely a woman's. Her pulse quickened. If Vanessa had been standing this close to the water, how had her clothes stayed bone dry? She took a plaster cast, heart pounding with each careful step. This wasn't just a clue. This was evidence. Back at her desk, Lila compared the print to photos she'd quietly taken of Vanessa's shoes during the funeral. The tread matched almost perfectly to a pair of Nike running shoes. It was a damning link, but still circumstantial. She needed more, so she went to Malcolm's mother, Miss Geraldine. The older woman clutched her hands as tears rolled down her face. "Baby, I told him he didn't just fall. My son was strong. He swam in that lake since he was a boy. Vanessa, she changed after she met that new man. I told Malcolm to be careful." Lila froze. "New man?" she asked. Miss Geraldine nodded. "Yes, child. A deacon from the church. I saw them together once. Too close to be just friends. When I asked Vanessa about it, she said I was imagining things. Now the picture, she knew she couldn't ignore it anymore. The problem was the sheriff. He'd made it clear he wanted her quiet. If she went through him again, he'd bury it. She needed another way. Vanessa's home was immaculate, almost staged, as if grief hadn't touched a single corner. White curtains fluttered in the morning air, and the scent of fresh lilies filled the room. Too fresh, too perfect. Vanessa sat on the sofa in a black silk robe, her hair pinned neatly back. She looked more like a woman preparing for a photo shoot than a grieving widow. Detective Johnson. Vanessa said smoothly, crossing her legs. What brings you here again? Haven't you bothered my family enough? Lila sat across from her, locking eyes with the widow. I just have a few more questions. Loose ends. Vanessa tilted her head, lips curling. Loose ends? Or are you just looking for a story? My husband drowned. It's tragic, yes, but nothing you dig up will change that. Lila pulled out a small folder and laid it on the coffee table. She slid the bank record across. Funny thing, 3 days before Malcolm died, $7,800 went missing from his garage. And then, this deposit shows up in your account. Same amount. Care to explain? Vanessa's mask didn't break, but Lila caught it. A flicker of fear in her eyes, quickly buried under a smirk. My husband gave me that money, she said coolly. He wanted me to be secure in case something ever happened. Lila leaned in, voice low. Did he? Or did you make sure something happened? The silence between them stretched tight as a wire. Vanessa's hand twitched against the armrest, her composure slipping just enough for Lila to see the crack. But before Lila could press further, Vanessa straightened, her voice sharp. You're wasting your time. No jury will ever believe a young detective with nothing but circumstantial nonsense, especially against me. There it was, the arrogance, the belief that her family name, her status, and her carefully constructed image made her untouchable. And maybe she was right. For now, that evening, Lila sat in her car outside the station, debating her next move. She knew the sheriff wouldn't back her. But sometimes justice didn't come from above. It came from those willing to fight in the trenches. She thought of Jamal, the young man from the garage, brave enough to tell her what he'd overheard. She thought of Miss Geraldine, Malcolm's mother, who looked her in the eye and said, Baby, please don't let them forget my son. And then her phone buzzed. It was a text from Jamal. Detective, I think I saw something that night. Didn't know if I should say. Can we talk? Her pulse spiked. She told him to meet her at the diner, the one place still open late in Pine Hill. Over half-eaten fries and a trembling glass of water, Jamal confessed. I was at the lake the night Mr. Malcolm died. I wasn't spying, I swear. I was walking home from a friend's. Cut through the woods. I saw them, Mr. Malcolm and Miss Vanessa. They were arguing. She was yelling at him about money, about being tired of him. Then another man showed up. I couldn't see his face clear, but he was white, tall, wearing a church suit. They all went down to the water. Next thing I heard was a splash, then silence, and then Vanessa screaming for help. Lila's chest tightened. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was testimony. Witness. The missing puzzle piece. But Jamal's eyes darted around nervously. Detective, you can't tell anyone it was me. Folks around here. They'll make my life hell if they know I said something. Lila reached across the table, steadying his shaking hand. I'll protect you, Jamal. But thank you. You just gave Malcolm his voice back. With Jamal's testimony, the shoeprint cast, and the bank records, Lila felt the case building like a tidal wave. But the higher it rose, the more dangerous it became. The sheriff called her into his office the next morning. His face was red, his jaw tight. Johnson, I told you to let this go. Now I hear you've been sniffing around, harassing Vanessa, dragging kids into this? You're making me look bad. With respect, sir, Lila shot back, her voice steady. You're making yourself look bad by ignoring the evidence. Malcolm Carter was murdered, and I won't stop until someone is held accountable. The sheriff slammed his fist on the desk. You're done. Effective immediately, you're suspended. Turning your badge and gun. The words landed heavy, but Lila didn't flinch. Slowly, she placed the badge on his desk. But as she walked out, a fire burned in her chest. Suspension wasn't the end. It was freedom. Now she could pursue the truth without chains. Later that week, Lila returned to the grocery store, this time not as Detective Johnson, but as Lila, the woman who refused to give up. And there she saw it. Vanessa, standing in line, chatting with the very man Jamal had described. A tall deacon in a church suit. Their laughter was too intimate, their shoulders too close. Lila snapped a discreet photo with her phone. Proof, not just of an affair, but of collusion. When Vanessa noticed her, her smile faltered, and for the first time, fear overtook arrogance. "You think you're clever, detective," Vanessa hissed as they crossed paths near the exit. "But you don't know the people you're dealing with. Some truths are better left buried." Lila leaned close, whispering, "And some killers always come back to the scene of the crime. Don't worry, Vanessa, I'll be there when your lies catch up to you." That night, Lila sat alone in her apartment. Files spread across the table, the glow of her desk lamp casting long shadows. She wasn't Detective Johnson anymore. She was just one woman against a town that wanted silence. But the evidence stacked in front of her was undeniable. And now she had leverage. For the first time, she realized the power had shifted. Vanessa wasn't untouchable anymore. And Pine Hill was about to learn that truth doesn't stay buried forever. The rain came down hard that night, beating against the tin rooftops of Pine Hill like a warning. But Lila Johnson didn't hear it as a threat. She heard it as a drumbeat, a rhythm pushing her forward. Her badge was gone, her title stripped, but the truth weighed heavier than either. Malcolm Carter's spirit seemed to whisper in every quiet moment, urging her, "Don't stop now." Lila knew she couldn't fight this alone. She called Jamal again, and though his voice quivered with fear, he agreed to help. "I'll do what I can, detective." "Sorry, I mean Miss Johnson," he said sheepishly. "You were right the first time," she told him. "Badge or not, I'm still a detective, and you're the bravest witness I've got." They met at the same diner. Papers and photos spread out across the booth. Jamal leaned close, his eyes darting to the door every few seconds. "That deacon," Jamal whispered. "That's the man I saw. I remember now, Deacon Harold. He preaches on Sundays like he's holy, but that night, he wasn't holy at all." Lila nodded grimly. "Vanessa thinks she's untouchable, but what she doesn't know is arrogance always trips people up. We're going to let her trip herself." The trap was simple, but dangerous. Lila arranged a meeting at the Carter family home, telling Vanessa she was closing the investigation and wanted to return Malcolm's belongings. But what Vanessa didn't know was that the living room was wired. Jamal had borrowed equipment from a friend who worked with audio. Every word spoken would be captured. Miss Geraldine, Malcolm's mother, agreed to host a meeting. Her grief was etched into her face, but her resolve was iron. "If it brings the truth to light," she said firmly, "I'll open my doors. That woman took my baby from me. Let her arrogance be her downfall." Vanessa arrived late, as if the world should wait for her. She swept into the living room in a black dress, pearls around her neck, her lips painted crimson. "Well," she said, glancing at Lila, "I didn't expect to see you. Thought you were suspended." "Just here to hand over Malcolm's things," Lila replied evenly, keeping her tone neutral. Vanessa sat, crossing her legs with theatrical grace. "Good. Let's put this all to rest." But Lila wasn't here to rest. She opened a small box and slid it across the table. Inside was Malcolm's wedding ring, his watch, and most importantly, the photo Lila had taken at the grocery store. Vanessa with Deacon Harold. Vanessa's face hardened. "What is this supposed to mean?" Miss Geraldine leaned forward, her voice trembling with both grief and fire. "It means you dishonor my son while he was alive, and it means you didn't stand by him when he died." For the first time, Vanessa's composure cracked. Her jaw tightened, her fingers curled against her dress. "You think you know everything," she spat. "But Malcolm was weak. He was holding me back. Harold understood me, gave me the life I deserved." The room went silent. Lila's heart pounded. She said it. She admitted Harold was involved. But Vanessa wasn't done. And in that moment, Lila knew the underdog had just turned the tide. The recording made its way into the hands of a journalist in Atlanta, someone outside Pine Hill's web of power and influence. Within days, the story broke wide open. Widow confesses to husband's murder in secret recording. Vanessa and Deacon Harold were arrested. The sheriff, forced into silence by overwhelming public pressure, could no longer protect them. The trial shook Pine Hill to its core. Neighbors whispered in church pews, long-buried truths rising to the surface. The Carter family sat in the courtroom, heads held high, as Vanessa's mask was stripped away piece by piece. Jamal testified, his voice trembling but clear, finally standing tall despite the fear. Miss Geraldine, though broken-hearted, held her son's photo in her hands like a shield. And Lila, no longer wearing her badge, stood outside the courthouse as the verdict was read. That evening, as the sun set over Pine Hill, Lila sat on the steps of her small apartment. Jamal stopped by, a quiet smile on his face. "You did it," he said softly. "No," Lila replied, gazing at the horizon. "We did it." Malcolm's voice was silenced, but together we made sure the truth spoke louder. Jamal nodded, his shoulders lighter than before. "I thought nobody would listen to me. But you did. You believed me." Lila looked him in the eye. "Sometimes the people this world underestimates, the poor, the young, the overlooked, are the ones who see the truth the clearest. And sometimes justice only comes when those voices refuse to stay quiet." In the end, Malcolm Carter's death wasn't just a story about betrayal. It was about resilience. It was about how power can corrupt, how arrogance blinds the guilty, and how the underestimated can change the tide of history. Vanessa thought her wealth and reputation made her untouchable. But her downfall came not from power, but from her own pride. And in Pine Hill, a town built on silence, the truth finally roared. Because when the underdog refuses to bow, when the overlooked demand to be heard, justice always finds a way. The courthouse steps buzz with whispers the day Vanessa Carter was sentenced. Camera crews angled their lenses. Townsfolk pressed against the barricades, and gossip swirled through Pine Hill like smoke from a long-doused fire. For years, people had looked away, afraid to challenge the town's powerful families. But now, they had witnessed something they never thought possible. Justice breaking through the cracks. When the judge declared Vanessa guilty, a silence fell over the courtroom so thick it felt sacred. It wasn't just a verdict. It was what it represented. For decades, Pine Hill had been ruled by money and whispers. The rich held the power, the poor held their tongues, and corruption lingered like an unspoken rule. But with one confession, one recording, the cycle had been broken. Miss Geraldine, Malcolm's mother, stood on unsteady legs as the bailiff led Vanessa away in handcuffs. Tears streaked her face, but they weren't just tears of grief. They were tears of release. "My boy can rest now," she whispered. The townsfolk looked at her with something new in their eyes. Respect. For too long, her pain had been dismissed, her voice ignored. But now, the truth had made her unbreakable. Outside the courthouse, Detective Lila Johnson didn't bask in the spotlight. She leaned against a stone pillar, her blazer worn, her badge still stripped. But she didn't need applause. Justice wasn't about titles. She watched Jamal give his testimony on the courthouse steps, his hands trembling, but his voice steady as he told the reporters. "I saw it. I was scared, but I spoke up, and Detective Johnson, she believed me when nobody else would." In that moment, Lila felt a swell of pride. The boy who once whispered in fear was now standing tall, his voice echoing for the whole town to hear. That was victory enough. A local reporter approached Lila. "Detective Johnson, do you think this case will change Pine Hill?" She thought for a long moment. The rain had stopped, and sunlight broke through the clouds, spilling gold across the courthouse steps. "I think," she said softly, "that once people see the truth, they can't unsee it. And once a community realizes their silence is part of the problem, they don't stay silent anymore." In the weeks that followed, Pine Hill began to shift. Church members whispered about Deacon Harold's fall from grace, some furious, others ashamed. Parents warned their children that reputation means nothing if it's built on lies. At the local diner, Conversations that once avoided politics now turned to justice, fairness, and accountability. The Carter family, though brokenhearted, found a strange peace in knowing Malcolm's story would not be buried. Miss Geraldine began speaking at church gatherings, telling others not to let grief be silenced by fear. And Jamal, sweet, scared Jamal, became a symbol of courage. His classmates no longer mocked him for being quiet. Instead, they listened when he spoke. He had proven that even the smallest voice could topple giants. Behind prison walls, Vanessa Carter's story became a cautionary tale. Once the picture of elegance and privilege, she now wore the plain uniform of the incarcerated. Her arrogance, the very thing she thought protected her, had betrayed her. She had believed no one would question her version of Malcolm's drowning. She had believed her wealth, her beauty, her social standing would shield her from consequence. But in the end, it wasn't the sheriff or the church or her powerful friends who decided her fate. It was a mother's grief. It was a boy's trembling courage. It was an underdog detective's refusal to quit. Vanessa's downfall was written by the very people she underestimated. One quiet evening, weeks after the trial, Lila sat on her apartment balcony, watching the sun dip behind the horizon. She held Malcolm's file in her lap, now marked closed. But to her, it wasn't just a case. It was a reminder of what it means to fight when the odds are stacked against you. Her suspension still lingered on paper, but she knew her fight hadn't been for the badge. It had been for truth. And truth doesn't need permission. She thought her grandmother's words spoken to her as a child in the Deep South. Baby, the world will try to shut your mouth, but if you know you carry truth, don't ever let them. Those words had carried her through this case. They would carry her into the next. In the end, Malcolm Carter's story wasn't just about betrayal. It was about what happens when arrogance underestimates resilience. Vanessa believed her lies were stronger than truth. She believed her privilege was stronger than justice. She believed Malcolm's life didn't matter because her own desires did. But her mistake was the same mistake many powerful people make. She forgot that the underestimated are not powerless. The overlooked are not voiceless. A mother with nothing left to lose can stop the mightiest storm. A boy with a shaky voice can speak louder than wealth. And a suspended detective can carry justice further than any badge. As the seasons changed, Pine Hill carried Malcolm's story like a scar that hurt, but also reminded. And every scar, painful as it may be, tells a story of healing. For some, justice came too late to save him. But for others, it came right on time to remind them. Silence protects the oppressor, but courage protects the truth. And in the end, justice wasn't delivered by power. It was delivered by persistence. So the next time you feel underestimated, overlooked, or silenced, remember Malcolm Carter's story. Remember that truth, no matter how long it's buried, will rise. And remember that your voice, trembling though it may be, can shatter the lies of the mighty, because justice is not a gift of the powerful. It is the weapon of the persistent. Miss Geraldine sat in her rocking chair on the porch of her small house, the same chair where she once wept into her hands, wondering why the world had taken her son. Now, she rocked quietly, a Bible resting on her lap. But this time her tears were different. Her grief had not disappeared. It never would. But there was a peace in knowing Malcolm's death had not been swallowed by lies. She could sit in her yard and lift her chin high, because the truth had spoken for her boy when the town once refused to. Neighbors who once turned their heads now stopped to greet her. Some apologized, their voices trembling with shame. "I should have said something, Geraldine. I should have stood with you." She didn't hold grudges. She only said, "The truth came through, and that's what matters. But don't wait for someone else to fight next time. Speak up before silence kills another soul." Her words carried, and in Pine Hill, silence no longer felt safe. For Jamal, life also changed. The boy who once crouched in the shadows, terrified of speaking up, now walked with his head a little higher. At school, kids who used to tease him now asked him to sit with them at lunch. Teachers praised his bravery, but more than that, they listened to him. Jamal began writing in a journal Detective Lila had given him, scribbling down thoughts he once buried deep inside. "I used to think my voice didn't matter," he wrote. Now I know it might be the only thing that saves somebody's life. He carried the weight of what